Hey everybody. Want to thank you for if you've watched the first two sort of parts of this discussion about reimagining education. I appreciate everybody taking the time to view that, and certainly welcome your comments and questions. Um, so this part three is going to talk a little bit more specifically about uh, looking at the future. And as we reimagine education, making sure that we take into account not just what we know about now, but thinking about what's going to happen down the road. About 7 years ago, I read a book called The Singularity is Near. Some of you know who Ray Kurzweil is. If you don't, there's a really good, at least there was a really good documentary called Transcendent Man on Netflix. I don't know if it's still there, and he's one of the heads of AI at Google, and I think he still is. And he has made a lot of predictions in the past about technology and how it would unfold, and has generally been a pretty good predictor about what's going to happen. And we can also look at patterns and look at something called Moore's law, which is the doubling of computing power every so often, every year and a half, 2 years or so. And we look at the power of exponents and the power of the potential of quantum computing. And there are a lot of technologies that are clearly in development. And we see the potential impacts of automation and AI. And there's nobody who has a crystal ball who knows exactly what's going to happen in terms of how automation and AI will impact things. But the prediction is that within the next decade, we will see a loss of millions and millions of jobs, potentially 25% of jobs in America, 20 to 30 million jobs. And it will primarily impact lower income Americans who are already struggling. And when you take away that many jobs in that compressed a time period, um, you have the potential for a lot of chaos. And Andrew Yang talked a lot about this in his campaign, and a lot of people ignored him. And it was one of the reasons I was very attracted to him as a candidate in his campaign, was because he was really thinking about the future. And so many of the candidates are really just thinking about now, and that both of those things are important. We have to figure out the problems we face in the short term, but also be thinking as we solve those problems, how can we also maybe simultaneously be thinking about the problems that face us as a society down the road. And so, if you look at the statistics, there are certain sectors that are particularly at risk. Those include the risk of automation, according to this report that I'm reading on CNBC. Food preparation and services at 81% risk, production operations at 79%, office and administrative support at 60%, farming, fishing, and forestry at 56%, transportation and material moving at 55%, construction and extraction at 50%. And those are all the areas that are at 50% or greater. And so you have millions and millions of people who are, say, truck drivers or working at a restaurant or working in an office and not working for super high wages as it is and hanging on. And there's a risk that automation and AI will take over these jobs. I want you to think about this just from a common sense standpoint. Think about, let's just take truck drivers as an example, which is a very common job. There's millions of truck drivers in the United States. And I want you to think about what happens when a truck driver loses his or her job. They may have been driving a truck for decades. And we know that we are getting inching closer and closer to automated vehicles. That is just around the corner, where a truck could drive itself across the country. Maybe not replacing it at first. I've heard reports about It's possible that what will happen is there will be a driver that will take the truck from maybe a factory, say in New York, and get it onto the interstate. And then it will be autonomous until it gets to, say, let's say it gets out to San Francisco, to the outskirts of San Francisco at the end of that particular interstate. And then a driver gets in and finishes the journey. So it may look like that to begin with. It may eventually look like someone is driving it, but remotely, like a video game, like we have our kids play Fortnite and those types of games, and they're able to control a character. So you may have someone who is remotely controlling that vehicle as it goes across the country. But the bottom line is that even if it doesn't replace a job entirely, it could replace it in a significant way where you would cut back the number of people that you need in that particular sector. If you can't see this, it doesn't mean that it's not real. It just may be that you don't understand how this technology is coming. And I don't mean that to be in a condescending way. It's just that not everybody understands automation and artificial intelligence and the potential impacts. But if you listen to the folks who do understand it, Ray Kurzweil, Elon Musk, you listen to folks who are immersed in this work, and they are sending us sort of a warning that this is going to be significantly disruptive. And because of the power of how fast things are progressing, how much artificial intelligence and automation is progressing at an increasingly exponential rate, it's going to happen sooner than maybe we can imagine it happening. And this is going to create not only disruptions and problems, but there's a potential for there to be mass chaos and disorder. Because when millions and millions of people are out of a job, there are going to be some jobs lost and certainly new jobs created. But the idea, and Andrew Yang talked about this, the idea that a truck driver who's 57 years old and has been driving, since he was in his early to mid 20s, is going to lose his job and then train to start coding seems a little bit, unrealistic. I'm sure that will happen in some cases, but I think the idea that we're going to take a bunch of people who have been doing a particular type of job, and we're going to be able to successfully retrain them in a way that plugs them back into the system, I don't think it's going to be as smooth as some folks think it will be. So AI and automation, we will lose some jobs, we will gain some jobs. I'm just not convinced, and I think most people are not convinced, that there will be enough new jobs created to replace the jobs that we lose. And when you flood the market with, say 25 million people who don't have a job and are looking for a job, then what happens to wages overall? Well, if you've got more people competing for the fewer jobs, so you've got the same amount of people or more people that actually are looking for jobs and fewer jobs to have, well, then the employer can pay you less, right? It's supply and demand. If I've got 20 people who apply for this job, I don't have to pay as much as if I'm struggling and I'm going out and recruiting and I can't find anybody to do this job. That, you see what I'm saying? So there's potential for this to impact everybody's salary. There's these sort of downstream effects that could happen in terms of people's salaries. So not only will it impact the people who lose their jobs, but it will also have downstream effects. And Yang describes this, like, I'll just give you an example of how there could be downstream effects. So let's say that we lose half of our truck drivers in America, and that could potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of truck drivers now. So now what happens on the interstate? You don't have a truck driver who has to pull over to, say, a pilot station or a gas station necessarily to stop and get coffee and buy some snacks. You don't have one stopping at a restaurant or a McDonald's or whatever. So you have these impacts that maybe you don't even foresee. So then folks who work at the pilot station, folks who work at the fast food places or wait staff and dishwashers at the restaurants that truck drivers may go to, all of a sudden, their jobs are being cut. So we don't even know all of the potential reverberations of automation and AI. We can think about through them, but it, it's likely to have major impacts. And so the reason why I mentioned this, what does this have to do with education? Well, it has everything to do with, as we consider restructuring and reimagining education, this goes back to my idea of, are we going to realistically, even if you buy the idea that the main purpose of schools is to prepare a young person to fit into a capitalist system, if there's nowhere to fit that person, then schools start to, the need for schools changes, and the needs of the school and of the students change. So Yang, in his book, The War on Normal People, and throughout his campaign, was talking about the potential need for a universal basic income. And we've seen this now that we've been through this pandemic, and we have millions and millions of people who are now on unemployment, who've lost their jobs. This is having huge ripple effects on family finances. And so what did the government do? The government sent out essentially about a $1,200 check to every adult, $500, I think, to kids. And this was like a sample of having a universal basic income. And so Yang was promoting this idea of having $1,000 a month for every U.S. citizen, and he would pay for it with this value-added tax of 10% on all goods and services. It's consumption tax. He called it a freedom dividend, and I'm reading from Wikipedia here. He claims it would replace the vast majority of his existing welfare programs. He said it would eliminate poverty for 41 million Americans now living below the poverty line. Let's just say, for an example, that 25 million people lose their job due to automation and so forth. Now, what happens to the wealth? The people in this case, when it comes to automation and AI, displacing workers, displacing labor, this does not mean that the company is failing and had to lay off people because it wasn't producing profits anymore. What's occurring is I can actually produce more profits by using machines and artificial intelligence. Why? Well, a machine, a robot, artificial intelligence doesn't need insurance, can work 24/7. They're not going to strike. They're not going to take sick days. They're not going to show up late. And I know exactly what they're going to do. So you know exactly what the machine and what the AI is going to be able to do. There may be a more expensive initial investment in creation and implementation of automation and AI, but in terms of a long-term cost, you start to see there comes a point where once you've got that in place, and all you have to do is make updates and upgrades, that you are actually increasing the amount of profit. So think about it like in terms of Amazon or any other major company that can hire fewer people, but still sell just as much. And the money that they're putting into paying labor is shifted to these machines and to AI. And then eventually there's actually a cost savings there. So there's actually more profits created. So the profit is still there. The capital is still generated. The money is still created. The economy is still moving in a way. But what's happening is it's being concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. And we see this over the past 30 years or so. We have trillions of dollars that have gone into the hands of the top 1%, while the bottom half of America has actually lost wealth over that same time period. And um, so the issue isn't that like we would be entering this thing where companies are no longer profitable and there's just economic downturn and that's why they're cutting back on workers. The problem is that they don't need the workers anymore. And as this goes forward, we're just talking about by 2030, that's just 10 years away, we may lose 20 to 25, 30 million jobs. What's going to happen if that pace continues to accelerate? We continue to, if you look at Ray Kurzweil's work, it'll blow your mind. And I don't, even if he's not exactly correct and he's being generous with how fast, the speed of technological change will happen, it's not going to like necessarily plateau or all of a sudden start going diminishing. This isn't like going to be like an upturn, downturn like we've had in our economy where we've had, bull market, bear market, and, the economy generally moves up, but it has its ups and downs. This is automation and AI is only going to get better and better and better and have the capacity to replace more and more jobs as we move forward. Well, if you're replacing human jobs, and if you have a child who's starting kindergarten now, they're not going to finish high school or let's say college. Put it this way, if they only finish high school, their jobs at double the risk of someone who has a bachelor's degree. So if you only have a high school degree, your risk of losing your job to automation is I think, twice as much as those who have a bachelor's degree. So you're going to have to take that kindergartner who's 5 years old, and they're going to have to go to school for at least 17 years, from 5 years old to 22 years old. So that's 17 years. So we're talking about right now, someone starting school right now in 2020 at 5 years old. We're looking at 2037 when they actually are done with their education. What is the job landscape going to look like then? And so we this is not some futuristic, Jetsons type thing that we're talking about. We're talking about within the span of the lifetime of a child who's in kindergarten now to when they graduate from college, the job landscape is going to look much, much different. And the majority of a significant percentage of the jobs that are going to be available to that child don't even exist right now. And many of the jobs that are available right now aren't going to exist. But I don't see us in education having that discussion. I don't see us really talking about how automation and AI are going to impact what we're doing in schools. I don't see us thinking about that. I think we get so wrapped up in our structures of doing what we've done about teaching reading and teaching math and teaching writing and teaching history and science the way we kind of have. And maybe, yeah, you use some new piece of technology, use a smart board or use some other, piece of technology to deliver it. But I don't know that we're really thinking critically and thinking forward about this, because even the presidential candidates, Andrew Yang was pretty much the only one who was talking about this stuff. So even on a national level, at a presidential level, we don't have folks who are really talking about this in any deep or meaningful way. And so I don't see it happening in schools much at all. And this is where it really needs to happen, because um, it may be too late for that 57-year-old, but we've got to make sure that the 5-year-old who's starting kindergarten this year, that we are doing everything that we know of that we can to prepare them for the world that they're going to meet. Now, going back to my initial theory, should the purpose of schools be to prepare a young person to fit into the capitalist system? And I philosophically have argued no. But now I think there's actually a cold economic reality that supports that, because there will not be a ton of jobs available, and the jobs that are going to be available are ones that we don't even know about yet in many cases. And so one of the other things that Yang talked about was something that he called human-centric capitalism. And I want you to listen to this is the description of what he called uh, a new stage of capitalism. Now, I don't care what you call it. I really don't. People get hung up on words like capitalism and communism and socialism, and I understand why. Those words have meaning, but call it whatever you want. But this is what he describes as this new stage of capitalism, sort of evolved capitalism 2.0, where you incorporate goals and measurements like childhood success rate, mental health, levels of engagement with work, freedom from substance abuse. That those things are things that you measure, and that GDP is an increasingly misleading and flawed measurement of sort of human thriving, because more and more of the work's going to be done by machines and AI. And so GDP, how much we actually produce, a lot of that's going to be being produced by machines. So it's not really an accurate measure of human flourishing. So he is proposing another thing besides universal basic income called a social credit system, where you would be able to barter goods and services, and you would talk about some of these higher values. And so what that might look like is, I will lead a yoga session or a meditation session, and in exchange, you will come over and paint my living room. I will provide you with certain services that I can't pay for in a traditional sense, in exchange for something that you can do. So we both have these values, or these things that we bring to the table. Maybe I will watch your grandmother when you go to work. In exchange for that, you will, I don't know, help fix some electronics in my house or something like that. So the idea is that we've got to rethink about the economy. We've got to rethink it. We are very much tied to, because all of us kind of grew up in this model of, I get money and the money is symbolic and represents my buying power. And then you sell something, and depending upon how much it is desired by people and how rare or common it is, you can sell something for a certain amount of money. There's a value in things, and then we put a symbolic value in money, and you get money through labor and through other means, inheritance, whatever. Oh, maybe we need to think about completely rethink the monetary system, because it's symbolic anyway, right? A dollar bill is just symbolic. It has no inherent value. Because you think about like Confederate dollars, they did have value, and they have zero value now. If the United States ended in 10 years, the current dollar bill may have no value. So there's no inherent. It's just a piece of paper with print on it. So money can be, or credits can be whatever we want them to be, and can symbolize what we want them to symbolize. And so I like the idea of a social credit system. What I don't like is the social credit system that has, like what we see in China, where if you talk bad about the government, you lose credits, or if you, you do certain things, you get credits that the government wants you to do. I don't like that, but I'm talking about actual services and value that you provide to your community. And so we find a different way to shape money. And UBI may be sort of the bridge to a more full social crediting system, because we're going to have to transition out of what we currently think of as money to if we're going to fully adopt some new type of credit system, we would need to transition out of that. And we have to also cover those millions of people that are going to lose their jobs and are going to be unable to find somewhere else to plug in the economy. And then going back to schools, then what should be the primary purpose of schools? Well, I do think that we need to examine the types of skills that are going to be universal regardless of the jobs that are created. So there may be some new type of computing language that is developed. There may be new types of computers to work with as quantum computing becomes more and more of a reality. There may be completely new paradigms and completely new things for students to learn. But what is it about that? Even though we may not understand it or know about it exactly now, what would a student need to be able to do universally that would apply regardless of what's created? And so that those types of things to me would be they need to be creative. They need to be flexible. They need to get along with other people. They need to be mentally and physically well. They need to have basic math concepts. They need to understand how computing works. Um, there are a number of skills that are kind of universal. But the idea that we are going to continue the models of having students just sort of memorize facts and spit them back out, that's that type of learning is not going to help a student, that kindergartner in 2037. Just not. I already can, you can ask me just about anything, and I can ask Alexa or Google and find out information right now almost instantaneously. So memorizing information in general should not be a priority. And that's only going to get better by 2037. You'll probably have almost instant access to any kind of information or data like that you need. So the question is, how do you apply that information creatively? How do you create things? How do you analyze things? And how do you work collaboratively to solve information once you have that information? So um, that to me is where we should head with schools. Um, I but it shouldn't be driven by jobs. So it shouldn't be driven. The primary driver of education shouldn't just be thinking about what jobs are going to be available. Let's make sure they're prepared for that. That is to me a secondary concern. The primary concern is human flourishing. And as I mentioned in the other videos, it's happiness, it's psychological, physical well-being, it's joy, it's peace. Because those things are going to be things that we need no matter what. And and we could potentially completely re-examine and rethink what it is to be human in a society that's increasingly where the labor is increasingly done by machines. And yep, you're not going to like some of you on the right are not going to like this, but you're not going to be able to allow 25 to 30 million people to lose their jobs and allow Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and other wealthy capitalists to they don't since they won't have to pay as many human workers to be able to keep more and more of that wealth. We've already seen a gross. People say they don't like the redistribution of wealth, but we've seen the redistribution of wealth completely go upwards. We've seen the super wealthy get wealthier, and the bottom part, huge chunks of the bottom part of American citizens are losing wealth. That trend cannot be sustained. There's going to come a point when people are just not going to tolerate that anymore, which is going to require us to rethink the capitalist system as we know it. It is an inevitability. And I'm not saying necessarily you have to think of where it's going, 40 years from now and make that happen today, but you better start building that bridge, because if you don't anticipate it, it's going to jump up and we're going to have mass chaos and social upheaval unlike we've ever seen in this country. That's going to happen if we don't prepare for what is coming. There's a wave that's coming. And actually, that wave provides us with this opportunity to rethink the economy, rethink the way we educate students, rethink what it is that we do with human lives. Because if we can get, if the amount of profits are the same, right? If we actually learn to produce goods and services cheaper, and and um and these companies are still profitable, well, the money's still there. The question is, are you just going to allow a handful of people to have that profit, or are you going to force them to redistribute it to everyone's benefit? And me being a progressive, I believe that there's a certain amount of money that people should be allowed to make. I have no problem with people getting, benefiting from their good ideas and from their hard work and businesses. But there comes a point where, how much money does one person need? Imagine that 1,000 of us got stranded on an island, and there's 100,000 coconuts, and one or two of us get, you know 9,500 of the coconuts, and the other 500 we have to split among the rest of us. I mean, that's just not going to happen, right? But somehow we've been able to be duped in this capitalist system to produce, trillions of dollars of profit. And yet we have people that go to bed hungry. We have homeless people. We have people who can't afford healthcare coverage in the United States. We can't afford to pay teachers what they're worth. I mean, there are a whole hope. We're not taking care of our veterans. We're not taking care of our infrastructure. We can't have clean water in a lot of communities. And that is not because we don't have the means to do all of that. It's that there are certain Americans that are hoarding wealth. And I think the only reason why there hasn't been a revolution at this point is because we've been successfully able to entertain people. We can give them cheap televisions and cell phones and internet access, and keep them occupied and entertained, and then keep them working so hard because they're working 2 or 3 jobs that they don't even have time to think about, or the energy to think about a revolution. And all the information they receive is from corporate entities. Whether you're watching MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, you're watching a corporate news channel who's in it to sustain themselves. They are corporations who are not going to allow for a fundamental restructuring of capitalism, because their companies are thriving and benefit from that structure. So they're not going to allow for a serious candidate or serious discussions over that would radically transform the economy. We have to be able to take a cold, hard look at the reality of what's coming at us. And the cold, hard reality is that AI and automation could bring about, there's a whole range of things that it could bring about. It could bring about like this new era of prosperity for everyone, where we have more leisure time, where machines and AI do the majority of our work, and we all have really cheap capacity to purchase cheap things. We all have housing and healthcare and the things that we need, and time to do the things that we really want to do, that our hearts tell us we want to do. And the opposite of that is we could have a dystopian future where only a certain select number of people have wealth, and they use that to create a secure state for themselves. And the bulk of people are left to fight over what little scraps are left after they've taken everything, or somewhere in between there. And I really don't know where we're going to end up, but I do think it's a discussion and a conversation that I'm thankful that Andrew Yang started, and that other people are trying to have, but too many of us are ignoring. And those of us in the education community need to have this discussion and need to be thinking about what are the needs of our students as we move forward and not getting stuck in old modes of thinking. Because the modes, if we get stuck in just figuring out how do we continue what we're doing and do what we're already doing better, we're failing our kids. We've got to be forward thinking and doing our best to anticipate what's coming. Mix that with a sense of what is right for the human condition, what is right for a human being, and not allowing ourselves to have the contents of what goes on in our schools dictated by people who just want more wealth. I think about children. No choice. They don't have a choice. They have to go to school. They have to go to school. And when they go to school, they're told what they have to do. They're told what the content and structure of their days are going to be. And in many cases, even the evenings, what they're going to do. And they have very little say in it, very little choice in it. If that's going to be the case, we need to be very careful about what it is that we're requiring of them, because we are getting them to spend the only real currency that anyone has, and that is their time. The only real currency that we have is the weeks and days and hours and minutes and seconds of our lives. And we're forcing students to spend that currency on things that they don't necessarily want. And I don't think that is a fair way or a way that we should continue forward, especially given the dynamics and what is going to happen in terms of AI and automation. What do you think about this? I'll be interested in your comments. Thanks.